Andrew didn't just get kicked out of Royal Lodge, he was sent to the one royal home that has always meant the same thing, and it's not a fresh start. Because Wood Farm Cottage isn't famous for luxury or comfort or even privacy. It's famous for something much colder. For over a century, this is the place the monarchy quietly uses when it wants someone to disappear without making it look like a punishment. And the people who've been placed there before weren't just embarrassing. Some were practically erased from the family story altogether. And that's why this move has set off alarms behind the scenes. Because if Andrew is really being positioned the way others were before him, then what's happening right now isn't temporary at all. It's the final stage of being removed from royal life. Stay until the end, because once you hear the history of this house, you'll understand why this relocation might be the most brutal thing the family has done to him yet. And if you want more stories like this, the ones the palace never explains out loud, make sure you're subscribed. Royal Lodge wasn't just where Andrew lived, it was where he stayed visible. For decades, that 30-room mansion sitting inside Windsor Great Park acted like a shield. Even after he stopped being a working royal, even after the scandals, even after the palace tried to quietly separate him from the monarchy, he was still there, still inside the Windsor bubble, still living in a property tied to royal status. And that's exactly why the pressure to remove him kept building. Because Royal Lodge isn't some random house you can quietly downsize from. It's a symbol. It was once home to the Queen Mother. It sits right near the heart of the royal machine. And as long as Andrew stayed there, it sent a message the palace couldn't control, that he was still protected. But then something changed. By late last year, multiple reports suggested the tolerance inside the family had finally snapped. Andrew, who had been living at Royal Lodge with Sarah Ferguson, was reportedly told the arrangement could not continue. And here's what makes that detail so important. This wasn't just about awkward family history. It wasn't even just about money. It was about the monarchy drawing a line and doing it in a way Andrew couldn't fight. Because once that decision came down, the move didn't happen slowly, it happened fast. According to several reports, Andrew's departure was abrupt, so abrupt that it didn't even look like a normal relocation. No farewell, no public transition, no staged new chapter announcement. One evening he was still at Royal Lodge, and then he was gone. And the way he left raised an even bigger question, because when someone moves out of a house they've lived in for decades, you'd expect removals, staff, schedules, weeks of preparation. But this exit was described like something else entirely, something closer to being cleared out. And that's when the whispers started. Because if Andrew was pushed out that quickly, then the decision wasn't negotiable. And if it wasn't negotiable, then what exactly did King Charles tell him behind closed doors? And more importantly, why was the palace so desperate to get him out now? Wood Farm looks harmless at first. A 5-bedroomed house on a quiet stretch of the Sandringham estate. Open farmland, sea air. No palace gates, no grand staircase, just privacy. But that calm exterior is exactly what makes it strategic, because Wood Farm isn't designed to impress, it's designed to remove. Unlike Royal Lodge, which sits near the center of royal life, Wood Farm is positioned on the edge of it, close enough to remain under the family umbrella, far enough to fade from daily relevance. You're still inside the estate, but you're no longer part of the core. And that distinction matters more than it seems. This is where senior royals have gone when they wanted quiet, when they needed distance, when visibility became uncomfortable. It has always functioned as a soft landing place, but also as a boundary line. And once you cross that line, returning isn't guaranteed. What makes this more unsettling is that Wood Farm has rarely been a stepping stone upward. It's been a holding space, a place where narratives cool down, where attention fades, where people are kept stable but not central. You're not publicly banished, you're just repositioned. And repositioning can be permanent. There's another detail people overlook. Wood Farm doesn't operate like the main royal residences. The atmosphere is different. Fewer formalities, fewer layers of hierarchy. It's intentionally stripped down. Comfortable, yes, but not powerful. That shift alone changes everything. Because when someone who once lived in a 30-room mansion with staff and ceremony suddenly finds themselves in a quiet farmhouse setting, it signals something. Not collapse, but containment. And here's where it gets more interesting. Wood Farm has been used before in moments of quiet royal discomfort. Moments when the family needed space without headlines. Moments when someone had to be kept nearby, but not too nearby. And once you look at who else has stayed there during sensitive chapters, Andrew's move starts to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern. Wood Farm didn't become famous because of Andrew. It became famous because of what happened there in the early 1990s, when Sarah Ferguson became the family's biggest public headache almost overnight. In 1992, not long after Andrew and Sarah announced their separation, photographs emerged that exploded across newspapers. Sarah was on holiday in France with her American financial advisor, John Bryan, and the images were so intimate, so humiliating for the monarchy, that they triggered an immediate internal panic. Because this wasn't just tabloid gossip, it was the kind of scandal the family couldn't control. And inside the palace, the reaction was brutal. Reports at the time claimed Philip was furious, and the family felt publicly embarrassed. And suddenly, Sarah wasn't just the mother of the girls. She was a liability. But what happened next is the part most people don't remember. Because the monarchy didn't kick her out with a press conference, they didn't publicly declare war, they did something much more calculated. They simply moved her. That year, Sarah was barred from attending the traditional Christmas celebrations at Sandringham House, and in royal terms, that's not a small detail. Christmas at Sandringham is one of the most important family rituals they have. It's where the public sees the image of unity, and Sarah was no longer allowed in that picture. But the family also couldn't completely cut her off because her daughters were still part of the inner circle, so a compromise was arranged. Sarah spent Christmas at Wood Farm Cottage with Beatrice and Eugenie, while the girls were allowed to attend festivities at Sandringham House. And if that sounds polite, it wasn't. It was a royal workaround, a quiet separation without an official statement. She was close enough to be monitored, but far enough to stay invisible. And once you see it that way, Wood Farm stops looking like a cottage. It starts looking like a tool. Because the family didn't choose a hotel, they didn't choose a guest wing. They chose the one residence that's always been used for controlled distance. And here's the chilling part. Sarah wasn't the first person Wood Farm was used on, not even close. Because decades earlier, the monarchy used that exact same house for someone else, someone whose story is still one of the darkest in royal history. Wood Farm's most unsettling story has nothing to do with tabloid scandal. It has to do with someone the monarchy almost erased completely, Prince John. Most people don't even know he existed, and that's not an accident. John was born in July 1905, the youngest son of King George V and Queen Mary. On paper, he should have lived a life surrounded by ceremony, protection, and privilege. But very early on, the family realized something was different. Relatives described him as delicate, slow to develop. By the age of 4, concerns were already being raised behind closed doors. And then, in 1909, John suffered his first epileptic seizure. From that moment, his life began shrinking. Because at the time, epilepsy wasn't treated with understanding, it was treated with fear. To the public, it carried stigma. To the monarchy, it carried risk. And as his condition worsened, John became harder to manage as part of the royal image. At first, he still appeared in family photographs. He was seen beside his siblings. He was included, at least enough to keep the illusion alive. But then the appearances slowed, and then they stopped. By 1913, John had effectively vanished from public view. No more official events, no more public outings, and no new official portraits. And here's where Wood Farm enters the story. Instead of keeping John in London or within the royal system, the family quietly removed him from the centre of royal life and sent him to live at Wood Farm Cottage, not as a temporary stay, as a permanent solution. He lived there under the care of his nanny, Charlotte Bill, known as Lala, in what was essentially a private household on the edge of the Sandringham estate, close enough to be part of the family, far enough to be forgotten. And that's the part people struggle with today, because from a modern perspective, it looks cold. But what's even chilling is how well it worked. John became a royal secret. He lived a sheltered life, simple routines, time outdoors, small comforts, chickens, gardens, quiet walks. His grandmother, Queen Alexandra, reportedly visited him and even had a garden planted for him. But the outside world barely knew he was there. And then, in 1918, something happened that makes this story even darker. John spent Christmas Day with his family at Sandringham House. He joined the festivities like nothing was wrong. Then he returned to Wood Farm that night, and less than a month later, on January 18, 1919, he died in his sleep after a severe seizure. He was only 13. And what the public saw afterward was not a full explanation, not a detailed truth, just a carefully controlled announcement. A quiet death, a quiet burial, a quiet disappearance. And once you understand that history, Wood Farm stops being a retreat. It becomes something else entirely. Because the monarchy has used that house for generations for the same purpose, and now Andrew has been placed there too. So the question isn't whether the cottage is nice, the question is what the monarchy is signalling by choosing that location. Andrew's move to Wood Farm would already look bad on its own, but what makes it feel truly final is what reportedly comes with it. Because this isn't just a change of address, it's a change of reality. At Royal Lodge, Andrew had space, staff, and the illusion of normal royal life. Even after everything, he still lived in a property that screamed status, a place where he could host friends, stay close to Windsor, and remain just visible enough to remind people he was still part of the system. Wood Farm doesn't offer that. Wood Farm is quieter, smaller, more isolated, and unlike Royal Lodge, it doesn't place him near the centre of royal life. It places him on the edge, and that edge comes with consequences. According to reports, household staff have been told they are not required to serve Andrew if they feel uncomfortable, and that detail matters because it hints at something the palace rarely admits publicly, that his presence is no longer treated as normal. Some sources have suggested that several staff members have already declined. Others have reportedly chosen not to relocate at all. So, for the first time in his life, Andrew may be entering a situation where the royal machine is no longer smoothing everything over for him. No full team, no familiar support system, no carefully maintained comfort. Just a house, a reduced circle, and a reputation the family doesn't want to carry anymore. And then there's the financial side. For years there have been constant reports that Andrew's money situation is tighter than people assume. Royal Lodge is expensive to maintain, the lease obligations are complex, the renovations were costly, and as public pressure grew, the question became unavoidable. Why should the monarchy keep funding the lifestyle of someone it has already pushed out of public duty? And that's where this starts to look less like a personal decision and more like a strategy, because moving Andrew to Wood Farm doesn't just remove him from Windsor, it removes him from visibility, from symbolism, from the places where the public can photograph him and say, look, he's still there. It narrows his world. And what's unsettling is how familiar that pattern feels. Wood Farm has been used to create distance without headlines. It has been used to keep people close enough to control, but far enough to forget. And now Andrew is living inside that same mechanism. So the real question isn't whether this move is temporary. The real question is what happens next. Because there are already whispers that Wood Farm isn't the final stop, that this is just the holding stage, a quiet middle step before something even more permanent. And if that's true, then what King Charles has done here isn't just a relocation, it's the beginning of a slow disappearance.
So when you step back and look at the pattern, the move stops feeling random. Royal Lodge represented proximity, status, and visibility. Wood Farm represents distance, quiet, and containment. And historically, people who have been placed there haven't exactly returned to the centre of royal life stronger than before. That's what makes this moment so significant. The monarchy rarely explodes into dramatic public punishments. It adjusts positions, it redraws boundaries, it moves people further and further from the spotlight until the spotlight no longer follows them. And that's exactly what may be happening now. Andrew hasn't been publicly banished, he hasn't been formally exiled, but he has been repositioned into a residence that carries a very specific history, one tied to isolation, management, and slow fading from prominence. Which raises the question no one inside the palace will answer directly. Is this really temporary, or has the final line quietly been drawn? Because if Wood Farm has taught us anything, it's that when the monarchy decides to create distance, it rarely reverses course. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think this is just a short-term arrangement, or is this the monarchy's way of closing the door without ever slamming it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into the stories the palace never fully explains, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.